Good morning. Welcome to the Yongsan Baptist Church English Sunday School class for July 17th, 2022. We are in Unit 6 of our study of biblical creation, and this is Lesson 4. We did 3 twice, but it's okay. We're still looking up at evidence from the heavens, and we are continuing our discussion on the age of the universe. Today we will cover a few facts, nagging observations, if you will, of modern science that fit rather nicely with the biblical worldview and the biblical account of a young universe, but present several challenges for the belief in billions of years. So the ones we will cover today, I guess just by way of review here, I'll go ahead and jump through what we talked about before, the difference in the timelines of the Bible and evolution, and the fact that there's a great divide between them. We covered lots of different topics here, and you can watch last week's video if you're missing out on that. So the facts that support a young universe are recession of the moon, magnetic field of the Earth, magnetic fields of the other planets, spiral galaxies, and comets. And again, these are only a handful because I have a short class period. So I'm not trying to delve off into everything, and as my wife continues to lovingly remind me, not everybody's as addicted to the science as I am, so we're going to try to keep it simple today. So, moon recession, right? As the moon orbits the Earth, its gravity pulls the Earth's oceans, causing tides. This is why we have a high and a low tide, why the water moves on the surface of the Earth, because of the gravity of the moon. And this is a poor picture, but you can kind of see here the tidal bulge on either side of the Earth based off the gravitational pull of the moon. As the moon is revolving. Does anybody know the difference? You rotate and you revolve. Right. So as the moon is going around the Earth and the Earth is spinning on its axis, the two forces are different and both create gravity. And what we see is that the tidal bulge on Earth relative to the position of the moon, right, is always ahead of the moon. So because it moves ahead of the moon in this track of the moon's orbit around the Earth, the tide actually pulls the moon forward, right? It pulls forward on the moon. Our gravity against the moon, moon's gravity against us, and this causes the moon to gain energy as it goes around the Earth, which then eventually causes it to move out in its orbit. As it gains energy when it's spinning around, it's going to move farther and farther away. So the moon moves out at about 1.5 inches away from the Earth every year, and we've been measuring this for quite a while. And it's due to this tidal interaction. Thus, the moon would have to have been closer to the Earth before now. Is that a logical assumption? Right. That if the moon is moving away, at some point in the past it had to have been closer. All right. So 6,000 years ago, the moon would have been about 800 feet closer to the Earth. That sounds like it might be significant, but it's not much of a change at all, considering that the moon right now is nearly 250,000 miles from the Earth. So the spiraling away of the moon is not a problem on a biblical timescale of 6,000 years. But if the Earth and the moon were over 4 billion years old, like evolution and the Big Bang Theory purport, then we would have really, really big problems. This is because the moon would have been so close, about 1.2 billion years ago, the moon would have been close enough to the Earth to cause massive earthquakes and tidal waves that would destroy everything on the face of the Earth. About the same force as we would expect from, say, a global flood that doesn't stop. Right? The global flood only lasted
150 days?
It rained 40 days and 40 nights, but yes, they were in the ark about 150 days. Yeah. So that 40 days, 40 nights of rain and torrent, imagine if that went 40 years or 40,000 years. There's no way the Earth would survive. Okay, so there's a limit there. About 1.2 billion years ago, the moon would have been so close to the Earth by the observable measurements that no life would be supportable. This suggests that the moon can't possibly be as old as secular astronomers want it to be. They would assume that the Big Bang is true, and so then they must invoke other explanations to get around it, because they can't forsake their assumption that the Big Bang is true. And why did we talk about why the Big Bang must be true? Why is it in their heart that they must believe the Big Bang? Because the only alternative is special creation, and that is unimaginable. That is their quote from secular humanist astrophysicists. The only alternative is special creation, and that is unimaginable. They can't fathom the concept of being accountable to a holy God who created everything and did it in a way that they can't understand or explain. It has to be naturalist. It has to be uniformitarianist. Okay, so they might assume, given their rescue devices for the age of the moon, that the rate at which the moon was receding was actually smaller in the past. I would give them that. But they don't say the reason why it was smaller. But this is an extra assumption that's needed to justify their billions of years model. The simplest explanation is that the moon hasn't been around that long. That the recession of the moon from the Earth is not a problem if you believe the Bible and you believe in a young Earth model, in a young universe model of about 6,000 years. That's the simplest way. And what is Occam's razor? The simplest answer is usually the right answer. Yeah, okay. So the magnetic field of the Earth is another point that we can use to discuss this. Most people have some familiarity with magnets. You probably have them stuck to your refrigerator door. Magnets have an almost magical ability to attract other magnets of certain metals separated by a distance. And they seem to reach out over space and pull with an invisible force. The region of space surrounding a magnet that exerts the force on other magnets, whatever that size of that region of space, is called a magnetic field. So the smaller the magnet, the weaker the magnet, the smaller the magnetic field. The larger the magnet, the stronger the magnet, the larger and stronger the magnetic field. Magnetic fields are simply caused by electric current. So you can make a magnet with electric current. And that it's a motion of charged particles that turns a metal into a magnet. Okay? So the Earth's magnetic field is approximated by what's called a dipole. We talked about monopoles when we were saying that if the Big Bang were true, we should see monopoles. That's a magnet with only one, either a north or a south, but not both. But you know that magnets have a north and a south pole here. The Earth is the same way. Two poles. It's a dipole magnetic field, and they oppose each other. Okay. The dipole of Earth is roughly aligned with the Earth's rotation axis, but it's off by about 11.5 degrees. That way, the north magnetic pole, right, and the north rotation pole are generally the same. The only time you need to know that they're different is when you use a compass, because where you are, if you look at a map, right, if you have a UTM Universal Transmercator map, you'll see a conversion, and depending on if you're farther north or farther toward the equator, right, you'll have a greater conversion when you shoot a magnetic azimuth, because magnetic north and true north are not exactly the same, and the difference is broader in different parts of the world, right? So if you've ever read that on a map and not knowing what it is, that's what it is. If you're using a magnetic compass, you have to adjust your reading based off where you are in the world, because magnetic north and true north are not exactly aligned. But for everyone else's purposes, they're generally aligned. Got off of there a second. The magnetic field surrounding the Earth has an important design feature. The universe contains radiation, which is harmful to living tissue. And Earth's magnetic field protects us by creating a buffer so that the radiation is diverted around the Earth, right? And that's one of the greatest reasons for a magnetic field, is to divert that radiation, the damaging radiation, and still let through the life-giving radiation, right? So the atmosphere offers some protection too, so a second layer of protection from the radiation coming from the sun. The Earth's magnetic field, again, caused by electric currents, but for us, they're within the interior of the planet. the core is spinning, right? And so we have a molten core and a solid core, and they spin in opposite directions, creating electrical charge that creates a magnetic field. There have been several science fiction movies that talked about playing with seismic devices that messed up the rotation of the inner and outer cores of the Earth. And when that stops, it collapses the magnetic field and everybody's going to die. And so they have to bore to the center of the Earth and set off nuclear charges to get the core spinning again. Anyway, the whole concept, though that is unrealistic, the concept that the core is spinning is absolutely true. And the fact that our magnetic field depends upon it, and lots of other things depend upon that, are actually true. So we would expect that because it is an electrical current that causes the magnetic field to exist, it would encounter electrical resistance over time. And that electrical resistance would make it decay. Magnets always decay over time, right? It's part of the laws of thermodynamics. Things don't tend to get better, they tend toward entropy, right? So everything tends to decay over time. The magnetic field decays over time, right? Gravity, force on the moon, right? That, again, it's decay. The actual pull of the Earth on the moon is decaying as the moon moves away. So we would expect that Earth's magnetic field would become weaker as time progresses, so it must have been stronger in the past. We've been able to measure the strength of our magnetic field for about a century. Not surprisingly, the Earth's magnetic field is indeed decaying. Every 100 years, the magnetic field of the Earth decays by about 5%. Since the Earth's magnetic field gets weaker as time moves forward, logically, it must have been considerably stronger in the past. Approximately 6,000 years ago, we can estimate that the magnetic field would have been quite a lot stronger, but still suitable for human life. However, if the Earth were even millions of years old, let alone billions of years old, the geomagnetic field of the Earth would have been so strong that life could not have been possible on any level, not even at the bacterial level. So, a few holes there. That's not how that was supposed to go. We'll give you the other one. Many of the planets of our solar system have strong dipole magnetic fields just like Earth does. Jupiter's magnetic field, that's the one here, Jupiter's magnetic field is extremely powerful, and the magnetic fields of Uranus and Neptune are also quite strong. And if these planets were really billions of years old, as secular astronomers believe, their magnetic field should be super weak by now, or they would have been so strong that long ago that it wouldn't have held the planet together. So, but they're not weak, right? If we can estimate where they had to have started to create the conditions that they are, we get to where like they shouldn't be as strong as they are right now, given that amount of time. A reasonable explanation for this is that they're only a few thousand years old, so it's not a struggle to believe that, okay, if they're only 6,000 years old, then they were super strong, they're kind of strong. But the suggestion that the solar system is only a few thousand years old is an intolerable position for those who believe in particle-to-people evolution. The vast ages are required for their worldview. It's an absolute necessity to have eons of time, because it's the only way they can explain what they have zero evidence for. Okay? And because the vast ages of time, their fairy dust, is required by their worldview, it must be protected at all costs. So the apparent youth of the universe must be explained away by the addition of auxiliary hypotheses, rescuing devices, as we've talked about before. Secular astronomers have proposed that there are planetary magnetic dynamos in these planets that can power the magnetic field. As it decays, it can repower the magnetic field. The basic idea is that motion within the planet can regenerate the magnetic field so that the total field strength doesn't decay. However, the planets that we can find don't fit the conditions necessary to drive such a dynamo. So again, no evidence for the supposed rescue device. And again, the simplest explanation is that the solar system's just not that old. sorry, there's bisections. I didn't even get into that. It's fine. Magnetic fields do confirm creation, though. I won't go there yet. There's in your notes, said there's one for the home team, right? So a creationist, a biblical creationist, PhD physicist named Russ Humphreys actually developed a model of planetary magnetic field measurement which can explain the present strengths in terms of biblical timelines of creation. In essence, his model estimates the initial strength of each magnetic field at the moment of its creation, based off of several different variables that are far too smart for me to get. In essence, and then after that estimation, the model then computes their present strengths based on a 6,000 years timeline of decay from electrical resistance. So impressively, the biblically based model of Dr. Humphreys is able to account for the present measured magnetic field strength of all known planets in the universe, and even some of their moons. If that's not enough, we can counter with, well, yeah, all models can be adjusted to the data that you have, right? And that's true. Models can be adjusted. So what's more impressive about his model is that he successfully predicted with his model, on a biblical timescale, the current magnetic field strength of both Uranus and Neptune before NASA's Voyager probe measured it. So before we knew what it was, he had an estimate for it. When we got what it was, it matched. Seems like pretty strong evidence for a decent model, because specific, reproducible, successful predictions are the mark of a good scientific model. And he also, again, this is totally off of what I thought the model could be used for, he also predicted that Mars would have had a remnant magnetism, or a permanent magnetism. And that's now been confirmed by other space research. Remnant magnetism occurs in rocks that cool and then solidify in the presence of an external magnetic field. There is remnant magnetism on the moon that we found, and there's remnant magnetism in the bottom of the ocean. And a lot of science textbooks, if you look at your kids' school books, those science textbooks will talk about reverse polarities of magnetism, right? They're not magnetic reversals, right? They're just laid opposite of each other in the way that they cooled. So it's not showing millions and millions of years of magnetic reversals and tectonic activity and all that in a previously molten planet. That's not what it's proving. It's this concept of remnant magnetism, because those rocks cooled so quickly under the flood conditions, right? When the fountains of the Great Deep were broken open and all that molten was coming up into the bottom of a super cooled ocean, right? All of the water meeting the hot rock at the same time, and there's still a stronger magnetic field of the Earth. So when superheated rocks that have a strong magnetic field cool in the presence of an external magnetic field, then they can create this permanent magnetism strips. Anyway, I'm off the course again. This confirms that both the Moon and Mars once had a strong magnetic field, as expected by his model. Planetary magnetic fields strongly support the biblical age of the solar system and not billions of years. So then, my favorite, spiral galaxies. A galaxy is an enormous assembly of stars and interstellar gas and dust. Galaxies occur in a range of sizes and can contain anywhere from 1 million to 1 trillion stars. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, contains over, same number, 100 billion stars in our galaxy, 100 billion galaxies in the known universe, right? That was that huge, unfathomable number of what's going on up in space, and God made all of that in, 4 or 5 words in the Bible? And God made the stars also. And he made the stars also. No big deal. Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy to me. But there's so much to learn about looking out there. So our Milky Way galaxy, not even the largest galaxy, contains about 100 billion stars. Galaxies also come in a range of shapes. Many of them are round or elliptical in nature. Others have an irregular shape, such as what's called the Clouds of Magellan. And those are 2 satellite galaxies around our galaxy. And then some of them are beautiful and spiral in nature, like these. The spiral galaxy has a flat disk shape and a central bulge. If we look at them like from the North Pole scenario, right, where we can see a perfect spiral, or if we were to turn on the ecliptic and see a straight line with a bulge in the middle, right? It's just all about what perspective we're able to get on that shot. So the spiral galaxy has the bulge in the middle. The disk section contains what they call spiral arms, and you can see those here, spiral arms coming off of the shots. And they extend from the center, the periphery of the core, from the core to the periphery is how they extend out away from the center. Spiral galaxies slowly rotate, but the inner region, right, this here in the center, these stars rotate faster than the stars at the outside. Makes sense, right? When you see something spinning that has ribbons coming off of it, in the middle it looks a lot faster. A bicycle spoke, right? If you look at the center, it's spinning so fast you can't count the spokes. But maybe out toward the edge you might be able to see them turning, right? Because the center spins faster than on the outside. This is called differential rotation. That's your science term for the day. So it means that a spiral galaxy is constantly becoming more and more twisted up as the spiral becomes tighter and tighter. After 100 million years, the galaxies would be so twisted up they'd be a solid disk. We would see no difference between the arms and anything inside of it, right? If you spin something around, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. We see that when we roll things up, right? At first you can see it gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, and then it's just a flat disk. You can almost not differentiate anything in the arms. But after a few 100 billion years, we would just see disks. We wouldn't see any spirals, let alone billions of years. But if the Big Bang scenario is true, the galaxies are supposed to be many billions of years old as the universe. So somewhere between 12 and 20 billion years old, depending on who you talk to. That would suggest that not nearly these spiral galaxies, that we can still see clear spirals, are not nearly as old as they claim them to be. They're consistent, though, with a biblical age of the universe. Secular astronomers have proposed that spiral density waves, this imagined thing that they have no proof for, no evidence for, no reason to think it exists. They just made it up. They said these spiral density waves arbitrarily move through the universe and create new spiral arms as the old ones become twisted beyond recognition. The idea is that waves of pressure just travel around the galaxy looking for new star systems to stimulate new growth. And of course such waves have never been observed. It remains complete conjecture. Furthermore, the spiral density wave notion assumes that stars can form spontaneously, which we still have no evidence of. Although virtually all secular astronomers assume this, star formation has significant problems of its own. Furthermore, there are difficulties in starting any supposed density wave in the first place. How does it get initiated? We know it can continue, but how is it initiated? Such complications are not necessary if we accept the fact that the universe is only about 6,000 years old and the spirals haven't had time to turn into disks yet. And this is another one that I think is pretty amazing. This was taken by the Hubble telescope in 2001, and they finally analyzed it enough in 2008 to realize, and you can't really see it from the photo because they don't give you the good photos on the internet, right? These outer arms are rotating in one direction, and there are inner arms rotating in another direction. So the fact that they're going two different directions, right, that they have discovered galaxies where the spirals on the outside are moving away from the motion. I can explain that with sort of a drawing here. If I have this spiral, right, and I'm spinning atop this way, right? So I'm spinning it in the clockwise direction. Then what we see of the arms should point, right, in the opposite direction. That's what should happen, is as it's spinning, what we see as an arm should be pointing the opposite direction of the spin. There are a few galaxies that, though they are spinning this way, like this, we would expect that because the arm is going this way, that they are spinning this way against that, but in actuality, they are spinning with it. It's also not explainable because given billions of years, that should unwind, right? It should unwind entirely. I mentioned this briefly in one of the previous classes that if they should all be spinning the same way because of the laws of conservation of centrifugal force, right? If all of it was a big bang that spun everything out, everything should be spinning the same direction. But it's not all spinning the same direction. And it doesn't do it exactly the same way. And then obviously here we have one that's doing it both ways. And I think, again, God's saying, I told you. You can't explain it. It doesn't go your way. I'm going to give you another reason. It doesn't go your way. So, I just love that kind of evidence. Because it doesn't hurt my worldview to see stuff that's confusing. Because God can do whatever He wants to do up there. Yeah. Right? Okay. Amen. Comets. Last one before we get out of here. Comets are balls of ice and dirt with which orbit the sun, often in high eccentric orbits. The solid central portion of a comet is called the nucleus, and comets generally have a region of vaporized material surrounding them. Right? That's what everybody thinks it looks like. That's what it actually looks like. But that surrounding, it kind of creates like a faint fog behind them, or a tail, right? The vaporized material is called the comma, and then the comet spends most of their time moving slowly near the point of their orbit that's farthest from the sun, or the aphelion point. As they approach the sun, they speed up, slingshot around the sun, and then move the fastest at the closest point, or the perihelion. So it's during these points of close approach that they create a tail, and which is just a stream of vaporized material and extends away from the comet. And just like with a jet that has a stream behind it, it's losing something. Comets cannot maintain what they give off when they create a tail, right? They lose material every time they pass the sun. Sometimes two tails develop, which an ion tail consisting of light-charged particles, and then a dust tail containing heavier particles. The ion tail is like blue in color, while and it generally points directly away from the sun. The dust tail is white and generally curved. Sometimes only one of the tails is visible. That's just a little bit of comet information. But the tails are an indication that comets cannot last forever, as I'm saying. It's been estimated that a typical comet, average comet size and distance from the sun, can only orbit the sun for about 100,000 years at most before completely running out of material. And so this, again, is an average figure, but most of them that we've observed probably wouldn't make it 10,000 years of orbiting the sun. Even knowing that, there are still those who cling to their billions of years. So, how do they handle that? They've come up with this idea of what they've referred to as an Oort Cloud, and they named it after Jan Oort, the Dutch dude who came up with the idea. I've got a rescuing device, name it after me. The Oort Cloud is this imaginary, not even hypothetical, curtain of comets that just sort of chill out way beyond what we can see. And somehow know when comets start getting wasted, and they just shoot a couple more in so that we can keep about the same number of comets. It's far easier to just think that the comets we have are the comets we've had. Some of them are wasting, some of them are still a little bit bigger, and that the universe is only about 6,000 years old. I don't really have to explain that anymore. But clearly there are many evidences which are fully consistent with the biblical age of the universe and are difficult to reconcile when you believe in billions of years. They are not proofs, remember this. Worldviews determine our presuppositions and determine the way we interpret evidence. So evidence is not proof. We can't get Big Bang supporters to believe the Bible because of this information. But we can challenge their worldview, and we can support ours. Often, you being able to defend your worldview is all it takes for somebody to question their own. Sometimes that's all it takes. You're different because you don't just blindly believe what someone told you. You know why you believe it. But Big Bang supporters can always invent non-falsifiable conjectures. That's a big fancy way of saying, if you can't disprove it, it's not science. Okay? And then they explain away the evidence, or they reinterpret it. You might have noticed that in most of these arguments for a young universe, We used uniformitarian and naturalistic approaches. That's because we're using their own approach, their own assumptions, against their own positions. Okay? To say that even your own assumptions with your own positions create so many inconsistencies, it cannot be true. We don't have those same problems with biblical creation. We don't have assumptions based on the Bible that lead to inconsistencies with what we see in the world. Maybe they lead to inconsistencies with what so-called scientists say about the world, but they don't lead to inconsistencies with what we see. Okay? Uniformitarianism is a blind philosophical assumption. It is not a conclusion based on evidence, and it's incompatible with the Bible. What we have is a counter to the uniformitarian belief that the present is the key to the past. No. The present is not the key to the past. The past is the key to the present. And this is the only true source of an eyewitness account of history. This is the only true, accurate history before recorded human history. All right. You can believe your Bible because it came from the Creator God. You can trust that it is the Word of God. We see that in several places. A couple that I put in your notes there were 2 Samuel 6:8, where Samuel said, "Thou art that God, and thy words be true." And John 17:17, where Jesus said, "Sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth." The Bible is true, and the evidence confirms that the universe is thousands of years old, just like the Bible has said all along. Amen. Let's pray, and then we'll get to the service this morning. All right. Lord, we thank you.